So let's create our very first Node Express server. So in here, we'll create a new file, and we'll call it server.js. Right, and yes, I want it to go into Git. And here we're just going to make sure that we have it. So hello from server. So let's see if we can run it. So node server. Okay, so hello from server. All right, so let's create our very first server. So to do that, let's head back to Express. So Express.js has all the commands you need to create your own little server. And it starts off with importing the Express library. Right? And that library, we're storing in a local variable called Express. And then we're using it as we're calling it, so it's export this require, it's exporting Express as a function. We call that function, and it gives us back an instance of an app, of an application, of a middle tier application. So let's copy that. And paste that in there. Very good. The next thing is that we're going to be able to start up the server. Right? We can say listen. Where's listen? There it is. We can also register. We can register an HTTP listener. We can say, hey app, if you get an HTTP GET request, hey app, if you receive an HTTP GET request that has the following URL, I want you to invoke this function, right? And then in that function, I'm going to be able to respond with a hello world. Okay? Right. This is equivalent in Java to doing a @get mapping. Yes? Where the URL is a slash. And then you return a string that says hello world. Everything okay? Right. And then finally, we can say that we want to listen at port 3000. Remember React listening at port 3000? This is where it comes from. Right? So somebody wrote a server that is hosting our React application that's listening at port 3000. Right? That's where it comes from. Okay, let's do it. So I'm going to run this node server. Notice that this time it didn't print anything. And notice that this time it's stuck. Right? It didn't come back. Right? It's because it goes into an infinite loop listening for our incoming HTTP request at port 3000. Right? So let's do that. Let's hit it and say, localhost 3000, which used to be our React application, and now it comes back with hello world. Right? This hello world is what we are responding from this function. See that? Right? It's what we're responding. Notice that this function, it's like an attribute. It's a parameter to this get. See that? Right? I find this syntax disturbing. So if I'm going to just move it out of here, I'm going to create an actual function, right? It'll say something, say hello. And then this function, I can pass it here as an argument. I think that's a little bit more readable. Everybody okay? All right? So I'm passing just a function as an argument, and this says, if you see this slash, call this function. Make sense? Right? Notice that what this function is receiving is two parameters. The first one is it represents the request coming from the client, and the second one represents the response that we can generate back to the request. We can send back a response. Okay. The request object, these two variables can be called whatever you want, but this is a very common three-letter word for these variables, REQ and RES. So the request is an object that represents everything that is coming from the request, from the client. Right? In here you will find the timestamp when the request was generated, the IP address of where the request comes from, any cookies that the browser is sending us, right? Any parameters, any headers that the browser is sending us would be part of the request. Here we're not using the request for anything. Right? We're ignoring the request. Instead, we are using the res here, the response, to send back data. Our data here is plain old string. It's a plain old string. Yes. This send function here is a pretty smart function, right? It looks at the payload here, and it tries to determine what is the best way to send this back to the server, to the client, right? It looks at this as plain text and says, I'll just send plain text. I'll use the MIME type text, right? But if it sees here HTML, it says, ooh, it's HTML. I should send a different MIME type. I should send HTML as a MIME type. If it sees JSON and it says message here, if it sees JSON, it's smart enough to say, oh, you know what? You probably want the MIME type application JSON, right? And it'll send the application JSON MIME type. Right? So if we run this again and we hit it again, notice that it didn't come back as raw text this time, right? The server sent back the correct data type, and the browser interpreted it, says, ooh, this is not plain text, it's JSON. So it's using my JSON plugin to render it as JSON. Make sense? Right, so this send function is pretty smart. Right? It knows the correct MIME type to use. If you know that it's going to be JSON, if you know your data, the data that is coming back is explicitly JSON, there is a dedicated function called JSON, right, that says convert this into a JSON object, send it in the body, and use the correct MIME type. Right? It doesn't have the overhead of figuring out what to send. Right? It's just always JSON, and it's a better practice. Everybody okay? Are still with me? All right. The other thing also is that we can pass arguments. Let's take a look at that.